they often touted lab on a chip. On the other hand, we have the paper diagnostics. These are based on capillary-based driven flows, probably the size of our stem. European mentioned, very inexpensive, excellent way of doing certain analysis, very specific answers. The challenge is that it's very limited programmability, kind of samples that you could handle and can be used for very specific applications. So we envisioned a world where maybe we could have the best of these two worlds. And in that, we got inspired by this idea that's been around since the 18th century of punch card programming. And this key inspiration, took us to the Jacquard loom. It's a Frenchman, Joseph Jacquard. He invented this loom for textiles, whereby by programming using punch cards, you're able to come up with new patterns without having to redesign the entire system. And so it really simplified textile manufacturing. In fact, this image down here was made, it's a portrait of Jacquard himself, and it was made by punch cards, made to order, printed in silk. It looks like a digital printer, but it's an actual textile, okay, in the 18th century. This idea was so powerful that it inspired Charles Babbage. In fact, he ordered one of these portraits, and it was found in his home. And in looking at some of his findings, some of the things that he left in Turin, Italy, one of the things that jumped out was this punch card code that he wrote. And he used this idea to build an analytical engine, which is the precursor to modern day computers. And we've seen this idea also elsewhere, in terms of radio telescopes and the music world and so many other areas where this idea still permeates and continues on. And we hope to bring it back to the and applying it to music, chemistry. Who here has used punch cards to program? Ladies and gentlemen, these are the people you look to for wisdom. And so, if you worked in Stanford in the 50s and needed to work, use it to use a computation center, you'd have to use it for the punch card programs. This is one of Stanford's punch cards. Anyway, so yeah, it let us wonder: can we use punch cards to program chemistry? And the answer is yes, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. I'm going to share exactly how we did that. And our inspiration is a music box. Who here has played with the music box? Yeah, much better. I will tell you what to look out for, what to go to for. But I'm going to go on and tell you how exactly this works in a lot of detail. But this video just shows good old music box, this toy. So and onto it is coupled a microfluidic chip. I'll share exactly how it works and how we use it as an idea. So this is a side view of the device in action. At the bottom is the punch card tape. And at the very top is a microfluidic chip. The background where it's focused is a module for valve. So what happens is whenever there's a punch hole, each of these gears turns individually, turns once in a one-to-one bundle.
What's the scale?
The scale, this spacing is 2 centimeters, actually 2 millimeters. So from here to here is 2 millimeters. Some of the scale was disappeared, but so that's 2 millimeters from here to here. And so in thinking of fluidics, you have to think of mainly two main things. You have to think of how can you pump fluids, how can you control this using valves, and and a series of instructions to do this. And that's what we do with this punch card code. I'm going to walk you through each of those key things that we use with the music box to do the fluids on chip. So beginning with pumping, it begins with the punch card tape. As it's reeled through with the gears, whenever there's a hole, each of these gears gets caught up and it turns once. And as it turns once, it acts on the microfluidic chip that's lowered to height that can interact with the gear. So it turns in an arc. And when it turns, it closes the channel completely. And as it turns all the way around, it ejects a fluid plug for downstream in the direction opposite to the punch card tape. And so here's top-down video of the scene, where, as you see, uh, uh, this is 1.2 millimeters across the reservoir, and we have 6 channels going through. And with each pumping action, we have fluid being pumped to the reservoir. So we characterize this, and we found that the flow is pulsatile in nature. It's shown in the chymographs on that side. And this is because of the elastic material that we use to make these microfluidic chips. So every time the pumping action up, there's a bit of a recoil in the material leading to that pulsatile flow. The second factor is we're able to achieve to a maximum less than 2 microliters per minute. As you can imagine, it's relatively low, but I'm going to share with you later how we ramped it up for molecular diagnostic assays. So the second aspect, we found that with microfluidics, when you consider the length scales, with the Reynolds number being low, mixing is quite a challenge. And so in order to do that, traditionally people have built structures within the chip to encourage that chaotic mixing. And so we find that if you have a zigzag pattern and that pulsatile effect or nature of the pumping, you end up getting enhanced mixing. Because with this pulsatile nature, you end up having fluid streams folded upon each other, thereby minimizing the distance across which diffusion occurs. So you end up with enhanced pumping. And this was characterized in our initial paper. The picture here shows the same flow, but using syringe pumps, and we see that you'll have laminar flow without mixing across the channels. But with the pulsatile flow, we have enhanced mixing. So that was a very important feature when you think of assays that require mixing in the chip. So the next aspect is the valves. So the valves work using the same gearing mechanism, where whenever there's a punched hole, it turns once, but this time it essentially plugs this cantilever beam. And as it moves down, the gear, which is always closing the channel, moves downward and forward in that action. And then it springs back to close the channel again. So we're able to characterize this and found that once the channel is open, it's about 100 milliseconds before it springs back shut again. So the next feature that we're able to build on the device is a droplet generator. And why do you care about droplets? It turns out if you partition reagents into many droplets and have amplification in each of these droplets, you essentially have microreactors where you could have, if you have a few target molecules in the bulk solution, each of those can have its own reaction. And thereby, if you detect them by fluorescent base means, you could have a very good, essentially amplification effect, which of the red molecule which would otherwise be lost in the dilution if you just did the bulk solution. That's where droplet-based assays are being pushed as the next frontier in PCR, those kind of amplification techniques. What we have as a droplet generator, it works in the same way as a valve, the same valving mechanism. What's different is just the microfluidic chip. So the design is such that you have a water-based solution in the middle, and it's surrounded by oil-based solutions on the other side. So every time this valving action happens, this plugging action, it springs open and then it taps on the channel. And when it taps on the channel, there's an injection of a fluid which is carried downstream as a droplet. I'm going to show you a video of this. It's in real time. The channel width is 200 microns to get a sense of this. So this is a top-down view, and as you can see, every time there's that tap, you have an ejection of the droplet, and there's a dynamic instability at this junction, which results in that breakoff, and then it goes downstream all the way. So we characterize this, and we got a one-to-one mapping with droplets on the size of 2.5 nanoliters for this particular geometry, and that could be changed with a different geometry of a different chip. And if you look at classical droplet generators, the droplets are on the order of 10 nanoliters, and there are some on the order of 10 picoliters. But the way they're generated is through a very carefully controlled tuning of the flow rate, very precise tuning of the flow rates, in order to get these droplets, sometimes with varying shapes, and it's all shear based. What we have here, to the best of our knowledge, is a fast handheld programmable on-demand droplet generator, which you could use with and generate without electricity um, for your assays. Now that we had our building blocks working, we decided to implement at first a very simple test case of a water quality test. And this water quality test is for elements that one would measure if you're doing aquaculture, because you want to make sure, for instance, if your ammonia is too high, your fish die. So you want to monitor that and make sure that everything is. So we looked at the pH, the ammonia, nitrates, and nitrite, and we used the reagents that are available as a kit, compared our results against the kit results that you would mix just in bulk. So on the left-hand side are the kit results, and on the right-hand side are the readouts from the outlets of our device, which is here, which we designed to mix these reagents in the same ratio. By using our device, we also use much fewer reagents because of their volume runs quite low. So I'm going to share now this second part on how we built on this. But before that, I just want to highlight that with our device, with this fast prototype, we're able to have 15 pumps and 15 independently addressable valves at a cost of roughly $5. And to put it in context, for microfluidic kind of pumps, each of them goes on the order of $100 or more, and valves easily $50 or more. And so the cost fraction part is quite dramatic when we think of classical microfluidic pumps and valves. And so we went on to design twice the bandwidth of our first platform. And with these 30 channels, we were able to move forward for the next phase of the design. But before I go into the chips in depth, I want to share with you the design principles for designing each of these chips. In case any of you want to, build your own later, because that's what we're home for. So think of it as a chip design template, as just a blank sheet of paper with a few areas where you have to do certain things, but you're free to do whatever you want anywhere else on that paper. So you have to cognizant of where the pumps are and where the valves are, because with that location you have the punch and tape that's going to tell these gears to turn and act on the chip itself. So as you draw it, you have to go that if you want pumping, your line will be aligned to the pump area. But if you want to route the channel back or do other things, you're free to do so in the spacing in between. And so here you could have one chip that has 6 pumps maximum to do one thing, or 0 to 30 pumps on the other end. And so there's that mapping between the punchline code and the design that you make yourself. So there also are the building blocks in terms of the number of inputs you play with. These are just single input designs, and here's multiple inputs, all of which go into a reservoir and the corresponding code that is required to run them. And then on the other hand, general purpose mixers, because mixing is quite key in terms of different chemical acids. And so with these different blocks, you could just put them together and knit them together as you will for your particular assay, and you end up with your own chip. I'll share how I did that for malaria-based chip later on. And so this process required a lot of iteration, not just on the chip itself, but also the device. And I like to look at this as this is my graveyard or museum. But this is the number of iterations that we had to go through for some of these designs. And the same was in the case of chips. I used to look at all the chips I've made and think that, what if I just took a picture? Maybe it would be enough for a PhD. So now that we have a tool, Elizabeth, one of our team members, took a trip to Tanzania to do some validation of some of these needs and get some of the additional feedback, and just kind of see, interaction with the user of the tool and see what you could learn from that, and also just see what other needs she could find. And she found that just like in Kenya, there were some needs, limited resources, and lots of people that she met, like I did, who have so many ideas, brilliant people, so many ideas. If they have the right tools, they'll be, they'll be diving into all their research ideas. And so there's this common thread of a lack of tools. So we thought of this modularity as a design principle in making these tools. Because with modularity lends itself well to biochemical assays because each of these steps can be carried out multiple ways. And so when choosing a set of modules, one can conduct a specific assay of interest. And so yeah, and the advantages with modularity obviously lies in this customizable aspect. But then there's also cost benefits because if someone could have certain modules, depending on what they need as well. And if certain modules are made at scale, it's just a matter of picking instead of having a very customizable one device that does one thing. And we also envision a community of developers that could hopefully, build or develop from this, so that we could enable more people to build more of these modules in an open space to lower this barrier eventually and to get more users involved or making for their own applications. And this concept of a modular design it's been used in the rockets, in the Apollo mission rocket, also Google's Project Ara. And with this, we find that with the different designs and the different approaches, some of these modules are still being used, even though there have been some catastrophic failures in some of the rockets. But the idea of modularity has stayed on in the making of the additional rockets. So I'm going to go about and share how we did this modular approach for our platform, starting with the punch card-driven microfluidic device as the core. We built upon it additional modules, one being an optical module, and the second being just a computational module to control everything. And within each module, there are elements that are interchangeable as well. And so that's the picture of the final device. So in looking at addressing biochemical assays, one of the key things that I mentioned was the relatively flow rate of our first prototype. So that was the first thing that we wanted to address in order to be able to do these assays in a timely fashion. So the first easy thing was to give it a more powerful motor. Because when thinking of the fundamentals of the pumping, it's how often you do it, how much you do it every time, and the volume you do it whenever you do it. So those three key factors that came from the first study. The second one is re-examining the gear series. So if you look at the default gear, each gear tooth is 450 microns wide, and the spacing in which it rotates is 700 microns. So as you can imagine, there's a bit of a play whenever it's turning, leading to inefficiencies when it's coupled into the channels itself. So even if the channels are perfectly aligned, if there's that play, you end up with these inefficiencies affecting the flow rate. And so to address that, we made additional gears of different weights in order to cover the channel entirely. So the other aspect is valving, which I've explained how it works. I'm going to show you a video of this in action. So this right here are the valves, and you have the pumping happening. So the top-down view, as you can see, whenever there's a whole punch card tape going underneath, the gears turn once, and then pumping occurs. And as you can see, there is a mismatch of timing between pumping and valving. It's such that pumping happens, and then valving just opens at the very last minute. So that led to inefficiencies in the flow rate as well as the pumping itself. So to address that, we changed this single parameter H. When H is 0 at the initial default set, when the pump is on, the valve is off, which is not good. So moving it up 1 millimeter, there's a bit of an overlap. But when H is 1.5, it's much better. But we found a sweet spot at 2 millimeters where we find that the valve opens just before pumping begins and stays open right until pumping ends for it to close. That's what we took on as a final design. Now, combining all these different elements, we implemented the chips of different parameters, and we were able to get a 50-fold increase in the flow rate, with the best setting being at a chip that's wide, 625 microns wide, being covered by a 630 micron channel gear 2.
Is the channel depth the same as the width?
Not at all. The depth remains at 50 microns. Okay. So the only parameter we change is the width. I'll now share with you a different element of this, which is the fabrication of the chip itself. This was a new contribution to the making of the devices, and I'll share with you why. The first being that our mechanism is such that we're relying on the squeezing of flexible channels. So we need a solid substrate against which this will happen. So for that, build an acrylic body. The second part is we want to be able to run volumes of different volumes on chip without necessarily running the same volume of reagents. And so in order to get that concentration effect and be able to run large volumes if we desire, introduce a idea of embedding glass matrix membrane on chip. I'll show you how we did that. And the second aspect, or the third aspect, is just the interplay between classical fabrication with wafers, and then adding on top of that plastic microvolts, through which you could transfer features onto the chip in order to have features, let's say, on the ceiling of the device, or be able to do multiple layers of the chip making process, or the chips that you end up making. In looking at the membrane inclusion, these are all like sealed on chip, and this enables capturing of the DNA within the matrix. So this is a glass fiber microfiber matrix, and it's kind of untreated, and it's such that at low pH, the DNA gets bound to it. But you could also release the DNA, if you will, by sending in a high pH solution. So having that made, we then moved on to the next modules, and the first being lysis for sample preparation. And for that, we use a thermolysis approach. That's the platform, and it was being worked on by ETAPC in the audience. That we're able to get temperature control, and it gets to the set point of 90 Celsius, so we're going for in less than 5 minutes. And another module that we added on is for the isothermal experiments that we were running, and we just use a off-the-shelf self-regulating heater to keep the temperature at 40 degrees Celsius. And the third module is an optical module. This module features 3 Raspberry Pi off-the-shelf cameras that are fitted with a emission filter that's cut to size to keep the cost low, that just covers the camera lens. And then line lasers that can cover the entire chip. And the imaging is such that you could image the entire chip at once. And so you get uniform illumination from these line lasers. And we chose 3 so that you'd be able to have 3-channel fluorescent-based imaging for your assets. This is just an example of the image you get from this optical module in an assay. And one of the key things that popped out from this initial experiment is sometimes you have bubbles that could mess with your experiment. So, but there are ways to deal with those. But if anyone has worked with microfluidics, you know, bubbles are the enemy. So, the other aspect is a control module, but we used a Raspberry Pi module, just off-the-shelf inexpensive combination, to control everything on the chip. So I'm going to go on to the last part, which is the disease we chose, and that's malaria, because it remains a killer, where there have been more than 200 million cases, 90% of which are in Africa, more than 400,000 deaths, most of which are children under the age of 5. And there's a big push toward elimination in 21 countries by 2020. And this parasite requires a mosquito vector, and it has different cycles occurring in the body. And it's such that you have to know which parasite you have because some of them have a dormant cycle that resides in the liver, the ovalic and the bifidus. So these hypnozoids leads to a recurring, if they're not treated, you could have recrudescence of the pathogen. They also are different in terms of incubation periods and all these other things, and how they're treated and the medication required. So it's important to know what species a person is infected with. The other development of malaria is there's a new vaccine in town, and there's a pilot program allowed last week. There'll be additional key pilots tests in Kenya and Ghana later on. And what's key about this is it only has a 39% efficacy, but it's taken a long time to develop, and it's such that given the lack of available options, they decided it's better to just do it. We may save tens of thousands of people, and it requires further research as well. So overall, malaria remains a problem, still an open challenge, and we've started seeing this blocked by WHO that there's been a rise of cases recently, and the key things that people are talking about, and some of the drivers of this is the vector insecticide resistance. We have gene deletions in the pathogen. So this is reported to gene for Plasmodium falciparum. It's a target for some of the mostly used rapid diagnostic tests. So a person may show up negative, but could be just a gene deletion, so you're missing that. And then there's drug resistance coming, even in the frontline drugs. So it's a national problem. So here we have the standard diagnostics, what's used right now. Rapid diagnostic tests, inexpensive, but with varying degrees of sensitivity and specificity, and still expensive. So they're still subsidized. Microscopy, the gold standard, it requires a very well-trained microscopist, and doesn't quite catch the lowest sense of in terms of the copy numbers per micron. So I think you have to be very skilled to even get below 1. And then molecular-based diagnostics. In talking to the person who's in the team in Kenya for doing the country task force in terms of the planning, they use that only for surveillance because of the costs associated with it. So overall, it's very expensive to have this use of that scale. So yes, malaria remains a problem, and RDTs don't mostly miss a lot of cases, as in this case in Vietnam, where 68% of the people were infected, but the test only got 4 or 5% of this. And so we decided to go for using recombinant polymerase amplification, and this is an enzymatic-based process that uses 3 enzymes: recombinase polymerases and single-strand binding protein. It's isothermal, so there are few energy requirements in doing the assay, and also the reagents come in lyophilized form, so they don't need refrigeration. They're very handy for being used on the field side. And so for that, I designed the primers sequences using the genes that were able to have been shown to be able to differentiate between the species, in addition to one that covers all the species. And after testing those, I was able to design the probes. So all of them worked in the bulk solution, and after having all of them worked, moved on to do some of these tests like a limit of detection assay or Falciparum, and found that without perturbing the reaction, we get something on the order of tens of copies as a limit. Well, the manufacture of the reagents requires stirring and other ways of preserving if the copy numbers are low, but we just decided to run it as we would potentially run our device for minimizing this kind of equipment. So as I've shown you how we have our license platform. So we looked at the performance of this extraction on our platform compared to a Kaizen bladder tissue standard kit, and found that initially we were doing relatively poorly. But by changing the final licensed reagent, instead of using the recommended equal license buffer to sample volume, by using a quarter of that, we ended up with a concentration effect where you ended up with much higher DNA concentration. I'll be happy to go into more depth if you have any questions on a particular way of doing this. But this is the design for the malaria chip. And this version is for the fully automated version. And with this, I'm going to shed some light on how the extraction process goes. So there's a kit for centrifugation-free diagnosis from CAD. And there are two main steps: an enrichment step, where you add your blood to this enrichment solution with functionalized magnetic beads. You pump out that enrichment solution to get rid of some of the impurities by holding onto the cells with a magnet. And you add on the lysis buffer. This is the new lysis buffer. Apply the heat with the thermal lysis step, and then DNA is in solution. So this is the lysis buffer that you could play with. If you put it at a lower volume, end up with more of the DNA in solution, low concentration effect. And now envision, like if you had the master mix already pre-packed on the chip, all you need to do is just pump down the DNA in solution. And that's the punch cut code that goes with this particular design. But before that, we went with a simpler chip that would just require, just pumping a single step reaction to do our initial assays. And so this is a video of all 5 assays. And if you can see, there is a green fluorescence. It turns fluorescent, so we're getting a positive signal at this particular target. I did another one where it was just blood. It's a negative control without anything else. And then one in which we spiked malaria infected red blood cells. Actually, that final video itself. So we're able to get that working. I must insist that this data is still on the relatively early stages, and there's additional studies to be done, additional work, tests to really characterize the system. Recently, we also got a patient sample of the Desiree Ebola for a patient infected with malaria, Plasmodium falciparum malaria, one of the species. We're able to get a positive signal. But I must say that there's more to be done in terms of confirmation and really comparing against other systems. So hopefully with more samples, we'll be able to do that. So this is part of that ongoing work. And the key, one of the key things is, thinking of scaling and manufacturing and addressing. And then a clinical validation plan where we'll, first of all, do additional tests with more samples in the lab. And, potentially asking for some from the foundation that is new diagnostic sample bag. Before, running this test in the field, Museveni, Kisumu, where the Ebola has a site, and then Madagascar perhaps, and comparing everything against microscopy and PCR approaches. So there's much more to be done in evaluating the clinical. Then there's the other vision of sharing this tool with the community. And we're thinking of a modular diagnostic website to make it openly accessible. And hopefully kind of make it such that people will be able to at some point develop modules and build, kind of learn from each other. And enjoying this platform and thinking not just for diagnostics, but more broadly for education based. So therein lies my story. Maybe there's a question before.
Yeah, why don't do you want to do acknowledgements first, or okay? Why don't we do some questions? From the audience, then we'll do the acknowledgement, and then after that we'll do the closed door session. So, any questions? Yes.
Very nice presentation. Thank you for making it understandable. You talked about the cost of the pumps and the chips. What about the whole device? What's the cost to get started with a system like this? Do you have an estimate?
So that's a good question. We think of it as a range from the no frills anchoring powered platform. So they're all battery powered, all the bells and whistles. So for that, the larger device we're thinking on the order of 500. However, that's not been ironed out in terms of this is just thinking of off the shelf, what's out there. By once scaling up and manufacturing is done, that'll be different. No. But when you think of cost, I think a big driver will be the reagents themselves. So by minimizing reagents, we're hoping that the end user would have less. But the initial cost would be for something that would be reused for.
Could this be commercialized for field water testing?
Absolutely, I see that application being very valuable. It's one of the things we actually considered as well in our initial work. At the end of the day, I think there would have to be kind of a deeper dive in terms of analyzing the viability. But as a technology itself, it's a generic platform.
Last question.
How robust is this system? So if you were to repeat your experiments a lot, I can imagine all of these pumps and valves can be pretty variable. So have you characterized that at all yet?
We've characterized different elements. For instance, the volume, the flow rates across the different channels. And we found that for certain settings, that variability is relatively low. But in thinking of running assays, we would make it such that for a particular step, it's run until the entire row of reagents are used before the next step commences. So even if there's a tiny mismatch, you could still have the reaction completed step by step. And the other aspect is, the reagents will be in the particular ratio for the particular reaction. So even if the variability is still behind. I must say that this is just a prototype. I mean, there's still a lot of manufacturing. There's still a lot of optimization to be done. There's still a lot of designs to look at, the right kind of tolerances for the repeatability. So at this point, yes, there's still variations, but in the future device, I think they'll be minimized and maybe systems built within to be able to handle those kinds.
Okay, so let's do the acknowledgements and then do closed door session.
I first want to begin with my team because this work I've shared is not just my own. I've had the privilege of working with remarkable people over the years, working on different phases of the design, coming in at different points. I'm extremely grateful because each person brought in a really fresh look from ways of doing things. Grace here is able to really solve the problem we had for years, and how am I going to scale up the chip making process? He came up with a very ingenious way where he turned the system upside down. I thought it would not work, but he made it work. For that, I'm really grateful. And we have Ethan who came in, was excellent with the programming, building of the optical and thermal systems and characterizing all that. Really grateful. Also in line with that, with the Hongchuan, came up with the design for the optical system and is a microscopy guru of the lab. If you have any optics problems, is the man you want to talk with. Hazel came in with the assay making, and it's really great to have this really good assay hands and getting that working as well. And of course, Matt, who's very hands-on and very valuable in all these areas, especially in the optics arena and processing of the images as well. I worked with Matthew when he was a high school student, and he redesigned the card, making it possible for manufacturing this device on a larger scale while we focus on Matthew briefly as well on the assets in the early stage. And then Ben and Elizabeth were really key in the product design phase, the early phase, really turning products from the Amazon off-the-shelf thing that I bought and used a hacksaw to open up to a tool that could actually become a product eventually. So really grateful for that work they did at the early stages. And along with this, I've worked with different labs. It is the Bohr lab, which I'm really grateful I'm also getting some patient samples, visited their site in Kenya. Extremely grateful. A big thanks to Elise and Garja for getting us the samples as well, the patient samples recently. And I've also worked with the Yale lab, getting a malaria factor red blood cells. Extremely grateful for Martha, Stephanie, and Katrina, who are always very generous with these cells and normalize all blood and never outdate them. They've been at the labs as well, the Richard Das lab as well. We've worked with them, the Pinsky lab, and the Dunn lab, good neighbors. As well. So thanks to you, Ria. I used a lot of my ratings reagents. I promise I always return them. Thank you. And Kiara as well. I want to thank my committee. I'm really grateful for all 6 of you. Thank you, Fabian, for joining the committee and including the RIA committee. It's really till it last minute. But more importantly, I remember the many times you stopped by the lab and I'll be working over the weekend and you dropped pearls of wisdom. One of which was write the dissertation title and do nothing else that does not contribute to that title. I think that's the obvious. A big thanks to Rachel. It was great meeting your lab as well and seeing your work and spending the day brainstorming for the essays. And we really look forward to moving forward with additional collaborations between our labs as well. And Desiree, thank you for being an extraordinary mentor. Someone I would always confide for guiding me. And so many times we went together and reaching out to your network. Whenever I needed anything, within the hour of meeting, you had sent 10 emails and I already had answers before walking out. So I'm really grateful for that. For always having my back. I really thank you for that. And Will, thank you so much. You embody excellence. It's such a great honor to have you as a chair of the committee. It's been great knowing you from when you were Stanford undergrad, and now you're chairing the higher committee. You never know who you'll meet. So thank you. And for your friendship. Paul, thank you so much. You're one of the reasons I came to Stanford. I don't know if you know that. But once you published the BioDesign book, I was still at Hopkins. I read it within 2 weeks. I wrote you an email, and you actually responded within 24 hours. I was so impressed. And beyond that, I've just seen you running your team with excellence and humility, and just doing incredible work, sharing what you've learned from your mentors, and spreading it all over the world and impact multiple patients all over the world. For that, I'm grateful, really honored to have you on the team as well. So, the next is Manu. So when I think of Manu, just like a lot of you, think of the genius that we are going to be. And beyond that, he's a consummate scientist, but also a really, a world explorer. He has a generous heart. A passion for impacting the world in many incredible ways. And it's been such an honor to have you as my advisor, and I thank you for letting me in your lab. And one of the things about Manu is that he dresses up from time to time. He is dressed up as a sports and he seriously. I miss that dance part in Puerto Rico, but I don't understand. So when joining the lab, I wasn't sure what I was signing up for, and I'm so glad that I did. And we've had crazy discussions ranging from crocodile skins, zombie ants, to ideas about making Frankenstein flies, to bubbles, dancing droplets, trichoplugs, so many more. I find that having a space was much more than I bargained for. But I thank you for taking a chance. I thank you for your generosity, for sharing with me your passion for global health. So I look forward to continuing this journey with you. And as you always say, this is just the beginning. So, yeah, there have been multiple people at Stanford whom I'm really grateful for. Ben Paris, he was also a key advisor. I remember in my third year when things were a bit rough. I was quite lost in the weeds, trying to make my way through. And I went to Ben, and he gave me a lot of excellent advice. From that meeting, I was really fired up and ready to push on the next one. And Lori, thank you so much for supporting us in the Masters of Medicine program. Through Stanford, I've had incredible joy of being involved with biodesign as a graduate student. Incredible team, incredible group of people, and I'm really grateful for them. And of course, with biodesign, we have Anurag and Christine, who also work in the lab as well, who are working with the global team. On the Stanford Bioengineering, I'm grateful for Katie as well. She's been very instrumental this last few days getting me into this place. And I want to give a special mention to Olga Lee. I'm really thankful to you. From the very first day I joined the department, how you always treated us with so much care. You're someone I could always go to. I'm really grateful for your support all these years. So it's such an honor to have you here, and I'm really grateful. And there have been other people in Stanford as well. And I'm going to highlight Lakshmi Jawar is an incredible machinist. He helped me with machining really neat things over the years, and we just walked to the shop, have a chat, and he'll get working on something for me. Really grateful for him. And Noel Luzan as well will really help me, especially in the initial stages, even with the funding for my graduate school work, and getting me reassured that I will always have funding. I should never worry about that. If nothing else, it worked. Always go together. I'm grateful for the Brackazones. And really grateful for all the support and all your help. It's been really neat to have your help for the people I could always count on for different things. Incredible set of people, really brilliant working on so many things. I'm grateful for my friends, the Calf and Sequoia families. And big shout out to Benny back there, and Big Mike who are in my tribe, and Plus Glenn and other people in the Stanford community as well, who've really supported me for all these years. And a huge thanks to my family. I come from a wonderful big family. Charles, Victor, Stella, Rosemary, Simon. Sometimes I don't remember what it is. It's always a good parenting until I don't remember. And of course, my family in Wisconsin as well. The list is very nice species. Without my family, I would not be here. I want to dedicate my dissertation work to my mother, who lived a life serving patients and showed me this life of service while raising 8 incredible children, working as a nurse in Rural Kenya. So her legacy lives on, and I hope to keep doing her proud. Last but not least, it's my wife, Holly, right at the corner. Asante sana mpenzi. I really appreciate all your support and for your endless supply of fresh bread. I love bread and all the good stuff. There's so much more. Thank you for being an incredible partner. She's also a PhD holder, so she's my consultant. She's my secret weapon, I always say. So whenever I'm stuck on somewhere, brainstorm with her. Whenever I'm frustrated, she's the person I would tell. She's a very solid, someone I look up to in many ways. So that's it. Thank you very much.
We'll move to the closed door part of the exam. We're going to take a 2-minute break.
And I must add that afterwards there's also a celebration of 2049 will be